Hello, and welcome to Bitesize Legal, where we tackle legal issues one bite at a time. My name is Drew Jenkins, and I'm an attorney licensed in Georgia and Alabama. And today we're going to try and take a bite out of prorations as they relate to real estate. This by far is the area that comes up most often in closings, is understanding how typically taxes are prorated, homeowners association dues are prorated, why are there library dues, and why are they prorated. It's a question that comes up and it can be very confusing, and it can be confusing to explain, but we'll see if we can get through it. In the big picture, a proration is nothing more than a single bill that we have to divide between multiple people. In the case of a real estate closing, there's a buyer and a seller. The best example is taxes are due at one time in the year. Someone is going to have to pay those taxes, and we have to determine who is paying them and how much of that tax bill belongs to the buyer and how much belongs to the seller. It is no different than if you and a friend were to go out to dinner. Your friend has to leave halfway through the dinner, leaving you to pay the entire bill. You settle up, figure out what they ordered, what you ordered, what the total bill is, and then your friend pays you how much you will pay at the end of the dinner. This is how prorations work. Now, it's also a good example of what's called an arrears. So sometimes you will see that certain items, such as property taxes, are paid in arrears. This is just like our example. The bill comes after. Another kind is called paid in advance. And paid in advance is like your friend calls you, you're going to meet at a fast food restaurant. You go ahead and tell them what to order. Your friend prepays, and then the meal comes later. When you show up, you settle up accounts then. So in that case, you are reimbursing the seller, or in that case, your friend, for prepaying part of your bill. Now, hopefully that we've got those 2 points understood. We're going to complicate it just a tad. In Georgia, property taxes run on a calendar year. So they run from January 1st through December 31st. If you are buying and selling a home, say halfway through the year, we know that the property tax bill typically, depending on your county, will not come out until later in the year. It may not be due until October or November. So your seller is no longer going to have anything to do with the house. So the buyer is going to pay the entire bill, but the buyer should only pay for half of it. So what are we going to do? We are going to give a seller credit to the buyer for the seller's one half of that property tax bill. And this applies to everything. A good example of prepaids are homeowners association or HOA dues. Those are typically paid in advance. Keeping with our example, keeping it simple, we're going to use an annual. And on an annual basis, one half through the year, the seller prepaid for the whole year, but they sold the house halfway through. So in this case, the buyer would be giving a credit to the seller, reimbursing them for the expense that they've already made. Now, where prorations can get really tricky is an area called homestead. Now, most of us are aware that when you buy a home as your principal residence, you receive a tax break on your property taxes. If you own a home for investment purposes, rental property, or even just as a second home or a vacation home, you're not going to receive the homestead exemptions, and depending on your state, you may not even receive a break in your assessed rate either. So what happens when a buyer intends to live in the home as a principal residence, but they're buying it partway through the year and the home is not homestead? That's a matter of contract. So you should ask this is common in the Birmingham area, not so much so in some areas of Georgia, but you should make sure that the contract states, hey, I intend to live in this house as the buyer as my principal residence. I should only pay the taxes that I would pay if the property were homestead. Now, if your sellers had it homesteaded and you're buying it and you're going to homestead it, there's no problem. The issue arises when your seller does not have the property homesteaded. And I'll use Alabama as the example. The taxes are going to be twice as high. You're assessed at twice the rate, right? If it's an investment property. Then the buyer, unless it's prorated correctly, will wind up paying one half of the year at a non-homestead rate. I think we can all agree that that's not quite fair. So the contract generally stipulates that if the property is not qualified as homestead, then the seller must reimburse the buyer for the excess over the homestead rate. I got through that without flubbing it up because I see it all the time. Basically, it's this. Property taxes, if it were homestead, would be half. Therefore, the buyer is only willing to pay half of the property taxes that will come due during his period of ownership. The seller is going to have to credit him an extra above and beyond the proration to cover the higher taxes. If you look on your closing disclosure or your settlement statement and you see that the taxes were not homestead and they have not been prorated this way, that extra step has not been done, you need to look at your contract and you need to inform the closing agent, hey, I'm supposed to pay what I should pay since I'm living in it full time as my principal residence. Now, the reason that you cannot receive homestead rates partway through the year are that the states have certain regulations that say, hi, you have to prorate by a certain date. Not prorate, you have to homestead by a certain date. Otherwise, we're going to leave it how it was the previous year at the non-homestead rate. In Alabama, that will typically expire. In Georgia, I think as well, it's around December 31st. So for the whole year, you need to make sure that you're homesteaded because the tax rolls aren't going to get updated partway through the year. The government doesn't want that hassle. But you should look into it. It can save you quite a bit on your first year to make sure that you're receiving the benefit of your contract. I hope this helped. If you have questions or I need to cover it again, feel free to let me know in the comments below. If you're watching this on WeChat, you can reply in thread. And until next time, thank you.